Hey Cloudcast community, listen up. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a cloud-scale monitoring and analytics platform. Datadog was built to bring clarity to complex dynamic applications, whether they're in the cloud, on-prem, in containers, or wherever you run your applications. With powerful dashboards, seamless integrations, and more than 250 technologies they can monitor, Datadog has you covered. Whether it's AWS, Azure, or Google services, your popular open source projects and products, or web security and APIs, Datadog can help you monitor them and help you collaborate around troubleshooting them and make sure they're running great. Datadog provides deep end-to-end visibility into the health and performance of modern applications. So, try it yourself. Get yourself a free 14-day trial. Go to datadoghq.com/cloudcast. That's datadoghq.com/cloudcast to try out your free 14-day trial. And if you try it out, let them know your friends at Cloudcast sent you, and they'll send you a great, wonderful, soft, awesome t-shirt with the Datadog logo on it. I wear mine all the time. So once again, that's datadoghq.com/cloudcast. Thanks for listening, and here comes the show.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. No Brian this week. This is Aaron. And we've got hopefully a very interesting show from both an international and emerging tech and discussion standpoint. We have Dave Blakey, CEO of Snapt today. How are you doing today, Dave?
I am doing well, thank you, and yourself?
Good. So, why don't we start off very quickly with, because I did mention the international flavor, give everyone a brief intro to your background, your location, and kind of your history coming up in the industry.
Yeah, sure. So my background is largely in kind of open source, free and open source software and networking. So I background in kind of bandwidth management, subscriber management for ISPs, carriers, things like that, in primarily third world environments. So hence also me being from South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa, not Cape Town, where everyone has been. That's where we grew Snapt, our company today, and kind of expanded it from. So yeah, my background is in open source, and it used to be in the days where you wouldn't say open source in a boardroom, I guess. People were hiding it. And then there was this dramatic shift to now that open source is, great and popular and kind of respected. And it's just been quite a lot of fun riding that wave, I guess.
Yeah, and so tell everyone a little bit specifically, because we do have a very large international audience without a doubt. But we actually can go look at our stats somewhat geographically around the world, and our stats primarily tend to come from where we would, probably expect it to come from, which means the predominant amount of listeners tend to be North America, Europe, or Asia, and Australia as well. But I would say South America and South Africa tend to be severely underrepresented historically. And so what are some of the kind of challenges that you mentioned earlier when it comes to dealing with that area of the world specifically?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have an interesting kind of, I guess it's a bit of a split. There's challenges and opportunities. I think historically there's been a lot less people that are exposed to the tech world and, just hobbyists, which are the kind of people that we hire, people that would be playing with their computer anyway, people that were, playing with Linux or Linux when it was very young and so on. And it's just not a large amount of those type of people because people didn't have access to it. At the same time, that's changing quite quickly, and we've got a lot of talented developers and people here that are coming from working for banking and traditional industries in South Africa that are now starting to get exposure to startups. So it's a bit of both. You must remember, obviously we have less capital here, so it's harder to raise startup funding for a lot of companies, and so that whole kind of Silicon Valley ecosystem doesn't exist as much. But we've got our own little Silicon Cape in Cape Town now, and there's a lot of kind of premier VCs that operate around here, and so it's changing a lot. I think hopefully your numbers will improve soon from South Africa. But yeah, I mean, we do just have a kind of a lack of people that have been fortunate enough to be exposed to all that kind of stuff.
So very interesting, Dave. And tell us a little bit more too, because you're kind of self-proclaimed, entrepreneur at heart, but at the same time, like you said, not necessarily in Silicon Valley or in that ecosystem or that culture. And so tell us a little bit more about those trends you see or have seen, because Snapt isn't necessarily your first endeavor.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. So, I mean, look, let me be clear and say, firstly, that most of Snapt's business today is in the US, and that's where I spend most of my time, both thinking and, being there a lot. But yeah, there's opportunities and, like I said before, opportunities and kind of problems with not being there, I guess. So it's a little bit of a harder landscape, I think, to get startup funding. We're a startup company, that was VC funded, et cetera, in South Africa. But at the same time, we have great people here that we're not competing against, the top kind of talent in the Valley, where it's very difficult to get developers and engineers, So I think more and more you're going to see startups coming from, quote unquote, third world territories like South Africa, India, even Australia, these non-traditional locations for tech startup businesses, just because they have a lot of talent now, and the funding and ecosystem is starting to develop. Like since Snap started 5 years ago. I mean, when we were going around town talking to VCs in the beginning, there were like 2 or 3 VCs we went to see. Now there's hundreds. So it's rapidly changing, and I think that's great both for the country, but I think also for people outside the country that are starting to use that technology and things like that. We used to think when we first started Snapt, I used to think it would be a challenge or difficult, operating in the US. Like 65% of our clients, like I said, are in the US, but it really hasn't been a problem. It's just, I guess, the nature of business today. A lot of the time, even when we're on a conference call with a US company, it'll be with 2 people that are in 2 different states, So this like more modern business environment, I guess, really has created like the opportunity for non-US or UK businesses to thrive.
Yeah, and to kind of bring together really 2 trends in one that you discussed there, both the open source trend as well as the location trend. To give you for instance, we were recently at an event called All Things Open, and it actually was here local in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's one of probably 2 trade shows a year that are in the Raleigh area, and All Things Open was in its 6th year, if I remember correctly, and has grown from a couple hundred people the first year to over 4,000 people this year, and it actually is surprising to see the growth around that. Now, don't get me wrong, Red Hat, is headquartered here, and that certainly has something to do with it. But there was a large amount of customers, a large amount of folks coming in from all over the country, and one of the common themes or common conversations was it was nice to see this not in the Valley.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's the shift. I mean, a large part. Look, Red Hat probably does drive it, but like one of the kind of fundamental principles that we have as a business belief, but I think it's probably largely driven by me thinking that, is that I think that this whole cloud native, this explosion of all these kind of exciting things that are happening today, free and open source software is ultimately going to win. And that's kind of funny coming from a vendor that sells closed source software, right? But what I mean to say is that they're starting to dominate. They're winning, and I mean in big enterprise clients. So like us, we look at how we can work with those solutions, with those companies to add value, But yeah, I mean, that's where the trend is going, is that open source, Linux, etc., will be leading this space. It is already leading the space. Certainly when you look at containers and microservices, Kubernetes, or that's where the game is now. It's not like that's not the cheap alternative or the free alternative or the bleeding edge alternative. That's just the main plan. Yeah. So I think you'll see a lot of expansion in that type of stuff.
Yeah, and let's dig into the tech a little bit then as well. Then so. You mentioned open source and your company. It was interesting when I was kind of researching all of this, the thing that immediately pops into my head is, it's a networking company. It's not hardware based. So it's SDN. But at the same time, you kind of have, and it was I admit, a new concept to me, of ADC. And so give us your thoughts a little bit of like, okay, what is SDN? What is ADC? And a little bit more of just kind of the state of non-hardware networking in general in the industry right now.
Yeah, well, I think that the biggest component, the biggest kind of vendor neutral answer to that is that it's the user that's changing so much, and it's probably the people that you were bumping into at the conference. The consumer of SDN, ADC, all these type of networking services has changed a lot. And we can throw around the DevOps word, but it really is that shift away from kind of networking focused engineers into people that are caring about the entire kind of platform, from the application to the servers they're running on to the infrastructure to all that kind of stuff. And in that environment, SDN and ADC play very similar roles in how they speak to those users. So just to touch on what ADC does, obviously, is in the past, we had a load balancer. Load balancer is responsible for distributing your inbound traffic to your servers as you grow. And all traffic nowadays is HTTP. So that's one of the drivers as well of this, like kind of a lot of the FOSS stuff, is that all, HTTP servers are running on FOSS as well now. But people started to say, ourselves included, what value can we add to this? If all we're doing all day is load balancing HTTP traffic, can we make it go faster? Can we add security? Can we, monitor response times on servers and all that kind of stuff? And that's what an ADC is. It's this thing that came out of there that's primary goal is to ensure the availability, scalability, and security of some high value or high performance web service. So in that way, when we look in a software-only environment like we run, whether it's in container environments, VM environments, whatever, it's quite similar to SDN, because it's people that are, deploying today or tomorrow type of deployments next gen, that want flexibility and agility, and that as kind of a standard. And a lot of that is driven by open source software. Yeah. And the consumer of that are these new DevOps. A lot of the time, like for us, we're a networking company and we communicate, about half our clients are developers. It's just a dramatic shift in the market, really.
And so you bring up a really good point there that popped in my head around, okay, so you mentioned containers, you mentioned VMs, and so obviously this is software defined in some way, but is this, is it a container package? Is this an OVF for VMware? Is this an AMI? Is this all of the above? And how do you manage that from a technology and packaging standpoint? That seems like a pretty interesting challenge to tackle, to offer the same product in so many different ways when it's beyond a packaging exercise at some point, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a challenge, but it's kind of empowered by the state of things today. So we sell, most of our clients are running Snapt on a VM. And when I say VM, I mean, an instance, like, so either on VMware or perhaps, it's an AMI that's running in Amazon or in Azure or whatever it might be. They've got an instance of Snapt that's running. A lot of our clients are also using our Docker images, or a lot of clients might be running on tin. So what we provide is we provide VM images, we provide container images, we provide all those things. But the real core of what we do is develop a software package that runs on Linux. That's what Snapt actually is. It runs on Linux, right? So when we provide you a VM, it's our pre-optimized and customized and whatever version of Linux. So because we can be deployed on any Linux system, because we just wrote a piece of software for Linux, it allows us almost like infinite flexibility. I guess we made the right decision early on. But when containers rose, we were the first to run in containers natively, because that's what we've always done, because it's just a software package. So it makes things a lot easier for us, because, even if you've got your own flavor of Linux, some people are Red Hat enterprise clients or, SUSE or whatever. And if you've just got a package that can run on Linux, you can run basically anywhere now.
And how do you deal with, or maybe you all have, it's already a solved problem, but I'm kind of thinking about it from a end user perspective. So how does that deal with like the dependencies and all of the other things that would normally just be a nightmare of something as cross-platform as something like this?
Yeah. So, I mean, we have two kind of, I guess, modes of operation, and by far the most people will use some sort of image from us. So a pre-built system, whether it's a OVF, VHD, VMX, or a Docker container or whatever it might be. And there, everything is preloaded. But we do actually let you just run an install script on any Linux device that will fetch the Snapt code and then, compile what you need on box and set it up and spin it up for you. So, and that's, I suppose the key thing is that's how we build our images. So we do the same thing when we run it on our Linux platform, right? or when we build our AMI for Amazon, or our images for Azure, we run the exact same thing. So we have stuck to being a software package for Linux, even though most of our clients, would use it in an easier to consume kind of format, and that's been great for us. I mean, it's something like I would 100% recommend. Even in the networking world, like we're a high performance networking vendor, but we went the path of just saying, let's do something in kind of user land on Linux, and we get great performance. It's agile, it's flexible, and it's easy to deploy. I mean, just leveraging that.
And how does that fit into, because you had mentioned kind of DevOps and automation and kind of a new, new skill set is the words I was looking for typical network architects. How does it fit in typically today? Like, what are some of the customer use cases and the tool chains, and how does all of that kind of work end to end?
Oh, it's changed so much. I mean, I would start by saying, look, a lot of the environment still looks quite similar. We are competing with or replacing existing kind of legacy vendors that, in the same sort of fashion. But the more exciting kind of new age stuff is where, it's really exciting and where Snap's strengths are. And I don't want to use just ADC as an example, because I think it's an important trend like across the market, not just happening to Snapt. Is this changing consumer, So in our environment, though, you would get someone that was, like the load balancer network engineer. And they were trained on specifically F5 or Citrix NetScaler or whatever it might be, and their job was just running that. And you would have one or two expensive devices at the front of your network, and you would log a ticket to get them to make a change, and they'd back bill you for your usage, and that just doesn't happen anymore. We've got clients that have got 400 ADCs deployed, and so you think, well, how does that work? That doesn't make sense. I mean, what's the model for that? How are they running them? Where, and you start to ask all these questions. What you realize is that people are tending towards these easy to move, easy to deploy, easy to spin up, like microservice type deployments, where they're happy to say, yeah, I've got my SDN set up, my ADC, my database servers, my everything that I need to run this as almost like an infrastructure as code type of deployment. And really, we're trying to stay out of the way, I guess, rather than be in the way, right? So, we're
Sure.
providing a service, but trying to say, well, let's empower that instead of requiring them to design it around us, which I think is kind of more of a legacy thing around networking, where people would have to build a product around how the network would work or how the ADC would work or whatever it might be. And so this DevOps consumer is much more concerned about the application as a whole and the day-to-day of the application. You used to get in businesses I've worked in, people used to say things like, well, we don't touch the load balancer, it's working. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, and that applies to a lot of networking equipment, from that kind of era. Whereas now, like we certainly see our clients are more interested in finding out, what are the response times from servers? What after last night's deployment, did server response time speed up? Did it slow down? Are certain servers slower than others? And if they are, then send them a message in a Slack channel where the developers are all hanging out. And so instead of this like huge focus on the complexity of installing and deploying a system, and that's like things like Kubernetes, and they're solving that as well now. Instead of focusing so much on what features and what, how many rules you can have and all that stuff when you deploy, there's much more value in what happens post deploying it and how you ensure like the quality of that service. In our industry, that means that people stopped caring about a server going offline because that's just unacceptable nowadays, right? Like, people have enough servers that if there's a failure, they have it stays online, right? Like things are just online all the time. So now instead they care about optimizing that, about improving that, measuring it, monitoring it, all that kind of visibility stuff. And the people that care about that are, in a lot of cases, the application owners or developers.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
We speak to different people. No. I was just finishing up that we speak to different people. That was it.
No. Perfect. So it'll be interesting. I have two ways to go here. One is consolidation and one is fragmentation. So I probably need to, I'll ask them one at a time since they're so different. I tend to have an infrastructure and storage background. Historically, I've been less focused on the network side and certainly on the security side. But it seems to me that there is the same way on the infrastructure side, like you were mentioning earlier, like, okay, this is this person's job, then this person's job. And you used to have these old tool chains that actually depended on people in different roles of, okay, the storage admin passed something to the server admin who passed something to the virtualization admin, but all of those roles are morphing and changing and consolidating. What roles are you seeing consolidate on the networking side and the security side? And do you actually see that happening?
So 100% of them would be my answer, honestly. And that goes from, we have a lot of Fortune 500 companies. So when I'm talking from small startups, even businesses like ourselves, all the way up to the top. Those roles are just merging, and it's not by some grand design that, this is the more efficient way and let's remove silos. And it's by necessity, because the same tools are delivering the same job, and they're also interdependent. And, it's just, you can't deploy these type of environments, these like hyperscale and cloud native environments, by being a specialist in one component of it. And you can't be that much of a specialist in all the components. So what you have, here's the buzzword, right? You have these multidisciplinary engineers deploying cloud native stuff in multi-cloud and multi-VM environments. And what that really means is just you've got guys that are saying, okay, yesterday, this was the greatest tech stack. Today, what's the greatest tech stack for this deployment? How should I spin this thing up? How can I make it agile and scalable? And, how can I mitigate my risks? And a lot of the time, that means just looking at a whole bunch of technologies and kind of grabbing the bull by the horns, So that's where we see the kind of consolidation, is that it's almost impossible for you to choose what ADC you need or what load balancer configuration or web acceleration configuration you need unless you actually understand the entire environment. And that goes all the way down into the code,
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just umming for no reason.
No worries. Go ahead.
So, that's just, I guess, the nature of it. I think people are trying to position and pitch that, people are creating these DevOps environments, and I think that's when sometimes it fails. When people are like, no, we need this big cloud native infrastructure, and we need to get all these DevOps guys, even though it's so expensive. And where we see it succeeding is when people are just trying to say, okay, I've got this application and I've got these pain points, and given the best of breed stuff out there today, how do I solve that? And that leads itself into that type of deployment.
Yeah. And final question, as we're kind of hitting our time here. And I said I wanted to talk about fragmentation as well. So that, what your earlier topic, it popped in my head of, okay, you're consolidating the roles, but your fragmentation, or potentially with containers and microservices and a lot of these, like as you go from this big monolithic environment we used to have into these more microservices based, you tend to have this fragmentation of keeping everything in sync, keeping everything in line, keeping everything, talking to each other. And, it's funny when people, have asked me in the past, it's like, okay, how do you deal with all of that? And especially, automation at scale. And it's like, well, it's all APIs and it's all policy driven. Those tend to be the two golden buzzwords, if you will. But break it down for folks a little bit more practically beyond just, hey, it's APIs and it's policies, right? How do you manage hundreds to thousands of instances of anything these days?
Well, and one thing that I must touch on at the end of that is that there's a people element that people seem to forget. There's like a human element to it, which is becoming a real problem. But so, yeah, I think the first thing to mention there is that, yes, at the very top level, when you've got many thousands of these type of deployments happening at scale and spinning up and spinning down in rapid time, it's very much leaning to how you automate deployments, how you build it into your CI/CD type processes, and how you run APIs to all these things. But the truth is that in a lot of infrastructure and a lot of environments, even at big clients, can be overkill. And I think sometimes people are overkilling it. That's my feeling. People are building environments that they don't need, and then they have their lead engineer leave and they can't work out how everything was running. Or 3 weeks later, the latest thing is to do something completely differently. I think very much it's important to build infrastructure for what you're trying to achieve. Like, don't force something into serverless when it doesn't fit there, and that's one trend that I really don't like. But yes, when you do have many devices like this, you need ones that are intelligent and aware of that. So, and it's such a broad spectrum of how you address that. So, like I said, we've got clients that have 400 load balancers. So you need a smart way of communicating with them, via like smart APIs. You need them to service discover so that they automatically scale up new servers. And so there's, minimal human interaction, and to view them all in that stuff. But you also need like a business that's pricing model makes sense for that support model makes sense for that all, and that's not me saying, oh, look at Snapt because you're going to save money. It's not about that. It's that, you need something that follows that kind of license on demand methodology of what you're deploying. And so that's one thing where the ADC market, I think, has fallen behind, something that we've tried to solve. But then the human element is something that's concerning businesses today big time. I was at a client this morning talking to them, and they were saying, we love this idea. We love the idea that when we've got someone that's doing special projects or something, they don't have to wait 2 weeks for change control because they wanted to make a change on the load balancer that runs internet banking. They can just run their own instance. They can, scale it up, scale it down. They can deploy it. They can move it from private to public cloud because it's all just, software, right?
Yeah,
but
right.
What do they do? Yeah, exactly. But what do they do when they've got 100 of these or 200 of these? How do they make sure that it's controlled? Like, these guys are sitting above the level of the people that are using them and saying, well, we're going to get just creep and they're going to be deployed everywhere and we'll have no idea. And how do we manage this type of thing? And I think that's where people are struggling, and that's where people should be trying to build these sort of DevOps teams that have tool sets and toolkits to manage these things and view them, because like otherwise it just becomes the mess you were trying to avoid. Like I said, 400 load balancers, and you got 10 to 20 servers behind each of them, and they're all running individually, like in different data centers, different cloud providers across the world. The way you manage that is with a team, not with software.
Yeah, it's the classic don't do technology for technology's sake.
Exactly.
And the other thing, and kind of the history of this podcast, we've seen a lot of emerging trends, and there does tend to be pendulum swings of just about anything. It's the new shiny thing, and then it gets over rotated too, and then it goes into this pendulum swings back, and then everyone finds the problems, and then it gets a little bit of a backlash, and then eventually the pendulum settles in, and we have that nice middle ground where it is another tool in the toolbox, and you get the rational design and rational thinking that tend to go behind it then.
That's a perfect description. Yeah, because that's what I'm trying to caution against is, sometimes it turns out that a couple of pieces of hardware running on premise are the answer, or sometimes just, a few cloud instances or an on-premise VMware install, or other times, a massive container, like a massive swarm of containers is the right answer. But that's less so than people seem to think.
Yeah.
And, I think there's a lot of jumping on that bandwagon.
Yep, agreed. So, Dave, that's probably the time we have for today. How can everyone find out more about you, find out more about Snapt, and reach out to you and figure out what you have going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a product company. So what makes me happy is if people go to snapt.net and click the free trial and play with it, kick the tires, mess around with it, set up your own dev environment, see what it can do. That's kind of the win for us, really, is just getting people to try it.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I appreciate your time, Dave. And on behalf of Brian, who wasn't able to make it this week, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.